Joseph, Hiram, Willard, and John are trapped. At 5:15, an armed mob of over 150 men rush up the stairs and try to force the door open. But the 4 men inside keep it closed by leaning against it. Desperate to enter, the mob fires through the door and shoots Hiram in the face. He exclaims, "I am a dead man," as he falls to the floor. Joseph rushes toward the window as 2 bullets hit him in the back, and another pierces him below his heart. He falls from the second-story window, exclaiming, "Oh Lord, my God." The Lord's prophet Joseph and his beloved brother Hiram are dead, sealing their testimonies of the restoration of God's kingdom with their innocent blood. Now, Joseph had known that if he hadn't given himself up, mob violence would increase in Nauvoo, so he left to protect the saints he loved. Before leaving for Carthage, Joseph addressed a large crowd of saints and concluded by saying, "I love you with all my heart. You have stood by me in the hour of trouble, and I am willing to sacrifice my life for your preservation." Hiram willingly accompanied Joseph to the slaughter, saying, "If we have to die, we will be reconciled to our fate." In the jail with Joseph and Hiram were many friends who stayed to defend them. However, one by one, they were sent to deliver messages or forced to leave. So, in the end, it was just Joseph, Hiram, and the 2 apostles Willard Richards and John Taylor, the future prophet. Willard had been promised by Joseph that bullets would one day fly about him and he wouldn't fall. Amidst the blaze of bullets, only one shot grazed the tip of his ear, fulfilling that promise. John Taylor was hit by 4 bullets but survived. So that the Lord's law of witnesses could be fulfilled, he kept these 2 apostles alive to testify as eyewitnesses of the martyrdom. But why did this happen? Well, the best answer was given to Joseph and Hiram's mother Lucy as she pleaded with God to know why her sons were taken. She heard a voice reply, "I have taken them to myself, that they might have rest." But why did the mob want them dead? Well, there were a lot of reasons. Some of the main ones were that they didn't like how fast the church was growing, or how prosperous the saints were. Many former members had personal vendettas against Joseph, calling him a fallen prophet. The final straw was when Joseph ordered the destruction of the newspaper and press that was printing lies and fake news about the church. This led Joseph and Hiram to be charged with riot and treason. A trial was held in Nauvoo by a judge who was not a member of the church, and both were found innocent of all charges. The evil masses, however, insisted they go to Carthage for another trial with a judge and jury of their choosing. Now, Satan's plan was to have the prophet brutally murdered, so God's church would fail again as it had in the past dispensations. But just like Christ's martyrdom, this final act did not frustrate God's work, as Joseph willingly gave his life for Christ. It is the church of Jesus Christ, and not the church of Joseph Smith. And even without Joseph as prophet, Jesus' church continues to roll forth and fill the earth. In an enlightening letter, Phoebe Woodruff wrote,
"This will not stop the work any more than Christ's death did. I believe Joseph and Hiram are where they can do the church much more good now than when they were with us."
But the saints were confused without their great leader. However, Brigham Young testified that Joseph had given the 12 apostles all the keys of the priesthood and everything they needed to carry on. As he spoke in a meeting, many saw and heard Joseph in Brigham's face and voice. The majority of the saints believed Jesus Christ had chosen Brigham and the 12 apostles to lead the church. The saints were in a hurry to finish the temple so they could be endowed with power and sealed as families before being forced to leave Nauvoo by angry mobs. Even before the temple was finished or dedicated, church leaders worked tirelessly day and night to help thousands of people to make these covenants. On the 8th of February, 1846, when the persecution became unbearable, church leaders administered the final ordinance in the Nauvoo temple. Before leaving, they knelt around the altar and asked God's blessing upon those heading west. A few days later, the first groups of saints left Nauvoo in the middle of winter. Of the more than 12,000 saints from Nauvoo, most were unprepared for the trek, so they made little progress as the frozen winter turned into a very muddy spring. Brigham once wrote,
"Today we made it through one mud puddle. It was 6 miles long."
The saints were now strewn out all across the state of Iowa, parts of Illinois, in various congregations in the East, in Europe, and on boats, with many of the 6,000 new converts sailing to America to join with the saints. All of them were seeking a place to worship God freely. It wasn't until September that Brigham and the first saints reached the Nebraska border and established winter quarters, where they began gathering food and building winter housing. They knew their end goal was still hundreds of miles away in the Rocky Mountains. As church leaders discussed how to organize this great migration of thousands of people, on January 14, 1847, Brigham received a revelation which he called
"The word and will of the Lord concerning the camp of Israel."
The revelation instructed as much about spiritual and emotional preparation as it did about physical preparation. The saints were to make covenants to keep all the commandments so they could rely on the Lord's help. They learned they weren't to travel as one group of thousands, but rather to travel as companies of hundreds, 50s, and 10s, organized under the direction of the apostles. The revelation further taught about gathering food and provisions and how to take care of the poor. Thus, with this direction from the Lord, thousands of saints were able to travel far away to the west. Finally, on July 24, 1847, the first company entered the Salt Lake Valley. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Now it's your turn to